Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our continuing series Retro Revamp Rewind, where I take a look at some of the earlier videos on my channel about games I want to talk about more. Today we're taking a look at Fatal Fury Wild Ambition on the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and this is actually a viewer request. It's a request from a lot of different viewers because they wanted to see more of the game and hear me talk about it again, so why not? Before we get too far involved though, if you can do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, there's a Patreon link down there as well, because Terry Bogart's a member, so you should be too. But I absolutely love Fatal Fury Wild Ambition, and I love talking about the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and I would say of all the different rare and obscure hardware I have talked about on this channel, people seem to be the most interested in the Hyper Neo Geo, so much so that when I found the Samurai Showdown prototype, Eurogamer wrote a story and it got picked up on a lot of different news outlets. It went to places like Slack News and other sites that usually don't cover a lot of gaming stuff, so that was a lot of fun to be able to get some press for a really rare piece of hardware and a prototype. But honestly, if there's one game on the Hyper Neo Geo 64 that's going to be the most common game to find, it is going to be Fatal Fury Wild Ambition. But the awesome part about that is it's probably also objectively the best fighting game on the platform. So it's nice that the best game is also the most common game. And I would say I should apologize in advance. I feel like I maybe raised the prices on the Hyper Neo Geo 64 hardware by talking about it so much and getting news stories written, because now suddenly I'm seeing that there's a lot of price increases on the Hyper hardware. Now granted, with the pandemic in the last 16-18 months, a lot of retro games and hardware have gone wildly up in price, but if I had anything to do with the Hyper getting more expensive, I apologize. I hate when that happens. But getting right into the gameplay, and let's talk about the game that we are talking about. This is an absolutely awesome fighting game, and I love everything about it. So much so that even the 2D background elements are spectacular, and this is really showing off the hardware capability of the Hyper Neo Geo 64 as far as 2D is concerned, because if you take a look at this background, it is in a really nice resolution. There's so much detail and so much animation. It really shows that SNK should have made a pure 2D game for the platform. But of course it's only 3D, so we gotta talk about what we're seeing. And I would say as far as 3D models are concerned, Fatal Fury Wild Ambition also has the best looking 3D on the platform. This is definitely better than something like the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, or Sega Saturn could put up. And even though this released in 1998, the same era that something like the Naomi was in arcades and the Model 3 still existed, it's showing that the Hyper Neo Geo 64 could push some really nice visuals when they were designed well. But as far as the fighting is concerned, it definitely feels a lot different than a regular Fatal Fury game. There's a lot more weight to your characters in 3D, and it is ever so slightly slower. But I actually really like that about the game. It's mostly existing on a 2D plane, but you can in some instances rotate around your opponent. So it feels like a traditional SNK 2D game with just a little bit of extra flair added. And that's what I really appreciate about it. It's got a ton of great characters from the Fatal Fury series, ones that are new, ones that you'll remember, but everything when you're playing the game just feels awesome. And I will say that I prefer this to something like Tekken. I would say it's on the same level as Virtua Fighter. It might not be the prettiest game for the era that it came out in, but it's definitely a super competent fighting game, because that's what you would expect from SNK. Now moving on here to Terry Bogart's stage, just all the detail in the background is spectacular. That woman cheering out of her window, the fact that the stage goes higher and there's more details that you can barely see. You can tell the developers at SNK really put a ton of love and attention into this game, not only in the backgrounds, but the 3D models, the fighting mechanics. Everything about it is one of SNK's best games in my opinion, and the saddest part, it's one of the games that the least amount of people have played. You can emulate this on MAME, it does not work very well. You need to have original hardware for it. And you even get a little bit of story element too, so watch that for about 20 seconds and I'll come back and tell you more about Fatal Fury Wild Ambition. You get just enough story to understand what's going on because it's an arcade game. It does happen quite quickly. But I love that cutscene because it just shows what the Hyper Neo Geo 64 was capable of as far as the 3D models are concerned. Because it seems like Beast and Fatal Fury Wild Ambition, the developers are able to figure out how to push more polygons with the hardware that they had. But it's a really nice complement to the 2D backgrounds. I feel like the 3D models really marry together well with those full 2D based backgrounds, and there's definitely some parallax scrolling going on with that boat in the background, the waves coming up, and this broken ship hull here. Everything feels very 3D even when you're rotating around. There's some layer issues, but otherwise it looks absolutely spectacular. And what I would say is if you've never played this game before and you're into collecting fighting games or arcade hardware, definitely pick up a motherboard and check Fatal Fury Wild Ambition out. You could do a lot worse, and definitely buy it before it gets more expensive, because I feel like in the next like 3 to 5 years, these are going to become games and boards that are really actually hard to find. So if you're interested in picking one up, I would 100% do that now. But it's been a ton of fun to talk about the Hyper Neo Geo 64 and the games. It's a really special piece of hardware that obviously failed. SNK lost a ton of money on it, but it is actually one of my favorite pieces of arcade hardware to play. And that's kind of interesting. Sometimes the failures are your favorite and the ones that succeed really well are just, decent games to you. But when you're playing this game and you're playing it well, it feels amazing. And of course, if you have a friend to play with you, you both learn a different character, it opens up a ton. And I don't think you're ever going to see this in arcades anymore. I have never seen any of the fighting games in arcades. The only Hyper Neo Geo 64 game I ever saw in the wild was Beast Buster Second Nightmare, and I've already covered that twice, once on Retro Revamp Rewind and once in the original series. If you can't tell by now, I really love the Hyper Neo Geo 64. But we have Raiden coming in here as a challenger, and I will say that this game gets quite difficult as time goes on. Getting to Geese and actually beating him in the end, classic SNK, the boss is just incredibly difficult. So this game's going to put up a lot of resistance, and you're really going to have to learn to get good at it to see more of the game. What I'll let you do is the music's great as well. Watch the next match from start to finish, and I'll be back about a minute and talk more about the game. So yeah, the music's great, the soundtrack's great, the sound effects are great, the polygon models are decent, and the 2D backgrounds are spectacular. It has everything that it needs to be an incredible experience, including the gameplay, of course. But the wildest thing is that there hasn't been a Fatal Fury game since 1999. The last game that came out was Mark of the Wolves, and while that is probably one of the best fighting games ever made, and it's a great way for the series to stop, I don't understand why SNK hasn't revisited Fatal Fury, because obviously we have a new King of Fighter game coming out soon. We just recently got a new Samurai Showdown game, but it's surprising to me that SNK just does not do anything with this franchise, because I would say it's one of their biggest, and it is really odd that outside of some compilations and ROM releases that run on modern hardware, there hasn't been a Fatal Fury game in over 20 years. It's almost been 22 years since Mark of the Wolves came out now, which one, makes me feel old, and two, disappoints me that we don't have another Fatal Fury game. But 100%, if you've never played this game before and you have a chance to pick up a motherboard and a cartridge for it, you 100% should. There's a ton of replay value, the characters are great, the gameplay is great, the graphics look to me really, really nice, and I think it's something that a lot of people would enjoy. Just avoid the PlayStation 1 version. It is a cut-down port. It's the only game from the Hyper Neo Geo to ever receive a port. It's ugly, it doesn't play well. Just pretend that version doesn't exist. But yeah, that's Fatal Fury Wild Ambition. Of all the requests I got of different episodes that people thought I should put on Retro Revamp Rewind, the number one by far thing that people wanted to see was this game. And every once in a while I listen to you guys. Well, actually I listen a lot, but I wanted to bring this to you because you'd been asking about it. Short of that, if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, ring that notification bell. It definitely helps us out. And I will be back with more episodes of Retro Revamp Rewind when I feel like it. It's one of those series that kind of comes and goes depending on my mood. But yeah, Fatal Fury Wild Ambition, I think it's definitely the best fighting game on the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and I think it's the first time that SNK was able to use full 3D to make a very competent fighting game. So if you ever see it in an arcade, rare as it may be, 100% throw some quarters in and give it a shot. Short of that, I'll have videos throughout the week, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. I lost.